If you had told me a year ago that my own mother would scheme with my fiancé to betray me with my brother, I would have called you unhinged. Yet real life can outstrip the wildest fiction. This is the account of how they set out to break me, and how I brought their plans down. My name is Ethan. I am 31, and I honestly believed my life was heading the right way. I held a solid job, put in 50 to 60 hours a week, and spent my off time mapping out a future with my fiancée Mara, who was 28. We had been together 2 years, engaged for 6 months, and I thought the path to a beautiful wedding was clear. My mother, Caroline, 55, was loud, intense, and forever poking her nose into other people's decisions. Growing up, I never recognized how much control she tried to exert. I thought that was ordinary, the way families worked. Over time, I realized her version of love squeezed until you could not breathe. My younger brother Blake was 29, a personal trainer who loved flexing for any camera within 10 feet. Caroline gushed that Blake had boundless potential. She would praise his physique and add with a little laugh that he was the real man in the family. She said it like a joke, but I never knew if she meant it as one. Soon, the digs at me grew more pointed. She would compliment Blake's physical presence while smirking that I was just like my father Victor, always on the job and rarely home. In the early months, Mara and I were steady enough. We had our arguments like any couple, but we shared the same picture of a place with a yard and maybe children one day, and we were taking on wedding planning with careful optimism. She worked as a teacher's aide, quiet and kind, the sort who drew hearts on the corner of a schedule. I suspected nothing until Caroline began making strange comments about Blake in front of Mara. At a family dinner about 2 months before everything detonated, Caroline turned to Mara and acted like I was not even at the table. She swirled her wine and said Mara should notice how hard Blake had been training, how his arms looked lately, how he was always there when someone needed help, how sometimes a woman required that kind of strong presence at home. Mara glanced down, clearly uncomfortable, and muttered that he was in good shape. I frowned and told my mother we did not need to talk about my brother's biceps over dinner. Caroline shrugged with a sly smile and said she was only stating facts and that I should not be so sensitive. It was a small moment, but it planted an ugly seed. For the first time, I saw my mother deliberately funnel Mara's attention toward Blake's body and availability. Weeks passed and my hours grew longer. I ran a small construction crew with several big contracts back to back, so I punched in before dawn and often left after dark. Mara and I crossed paths for quick dinners or a rare Sunday afternoon. She grew quieter while her phone lit up with messages that made her give a half smile. She told me she was texting a friend from work and said I should not get paranoid. I answered that I was not paranoid, only curious, because lately she seemed glued to her screen. She would flip the phone away and say it was nothing, just wedding stress. That was the first flicker that she might be hiding something, but I told myself nerves and planning could make anyone secretive. Caroline's behavior shifted from subtle comments to open campaigning. She would corner Mara at family gatherings or invite her over to talk through decorations and seating charts. Victor, who mostly played doormat to my mother, tried to give me advice. He said my mother meant well and simply had strong opinions. Strong opinions did not cover it. She commented on how I dressed, how I spent money, how I was never around, and how Blake was the ideal partner. Mara started coming back from those meetings, tense and distant. She would bite her lip, avoid my eyes, and slip into the bedroom to read or stream a show alone. I let it go, thinking most relationships had highs and lows. Then came the day everything cracked. I finished work early and decided to surprise Caroline and Mara while they were supposedly working on wedding details at my parents' place. I pulled up in my beat-up pickup, the engine rattling, and heard voices through an open window. Caroline's voice was sharp and clear. She told Mara that I was just like Victor, always gone, and that Mara would never see me if she married me. She said Mara needed someone physically present who could meet every need, and she said flat out that Blake was the stronger man. My chest hammered. Mara answered in a smaller voice that she knew I worked a lot and that she got lonely. She said Blake had texted her a few times, but insisted it was not anything big. Caroline cut her off and told her not to be ashamed, that Blake was everything she needed, that I lacked the vitality to keep her happy, and that she only said this from love because she saw me growing distant while Blake was right there and always willing. Hearing my mother guide my fiancé toward my brother was like having the floor vanish under my feet. I wanted to crash in and yell, but I made myself hold still and listen. Mara admitted that it felt good to have someone checking on her daily. She said Blake noticed how lonely she seemed. That was enough. I walked into the living room. Caroline's face switched to a polite social smile, as if I were a neighbor dropping by. Mara's expression turned to panic. I asked if this was how wedding planning worked now. Caroline stood and raised her chin, saying someone had to tell Mara the truth. She said Blake could be the partner Mara truly required. I asked if she understood how deranged that sounded, encouraging my fiancé to pair off with my brother. Mara rushed to say she was sorry, and that Caroline had been in her ear, but that it was just texting. I told her to show me her phone. She froze. I repeated the request. Her hand clamped around the device. That was my answer. Caroline snapped that I had no right to demand a phone, and that Blake respected women's boundaries and would never do that. The hypocrisy was staggering. This was the same woman who snooped through Victor's emails every morning. I left the house without another word, shaking from head to toe. Mara followed me to the driveway in tears, saying she was confused and that Caroline had gotten into her head. She promised to delete Blake's number and swore it meant nothing, but I had already seen her willingness to consider my own brother as a substitute, with my mother cheerleading. At home, I found 6 missed calls from Blake and a text that said we needed to talk. I laughed without humor. Caroline called and left a voicemail claiming I was overreacting, that Mara was still a good person, that Blake was just being supportive, and that I should not throw Mara away for being paranoid. She tried to make my outrage look like the problem. Victor called too, aiming for truce and suggesting I give Mara another shot because Caroline sometimes spoke without thinking. I was finished. That night, Mara slept in the guest room and said she needed time to think. I thought she needed time to message Blake. The next days spiraled. Mara went out more often under the banner of girls' nights. Caroline sent me guilt-soaked messages saying I would lose a wonderful woman if I kept pushing her away with suspicion. Part of me wanted to end the engagement immediately. Another part wanted proof I could hold in my hands. One Thursday, Mara said she was meeting her old friend Jenna for drinks. Something felt off. She dressed up more than usual and wore a perfume I knew Blake liked because I had once heard him praise that scent. I got in my truck, drove to Blake's apartment complex, and parked where I could see the visitor spots. Mara's car was there. My heart pounded in my throat while I watched the lighted window. About 20 minutes later, I saw them through his ground floor blinds. Mara tucked under his arm, heads close, watching something on his laptop. My stomach turned. I pounded on the door. They opened it with the color high in their faces. Blake wore a tight compression shirt to show off his arms. Mara wore the outfit I had bought her for her last birthday. I asked how long it had been going on. Blake lifted his hands and told me to calm down so we could have an adult talk. I repeated the question. Mara whispered that it had been 2 months, that it just happened, that I was always working late, and that Blake understood her better. She started a sentence with Caroline's first name, as if they were teammates. I laughed, hard and ugly, and asked if they were on a first-name basis while they plotted behind my back. Blake told me not to talk to her the way I did, and claimed I had neglected her, and that she came to him for help. I asked what kind of help he meant. Help with losing her moral compass. He threw a punch. He had always had a hot temper. I blocked, shoved him backward, and he went over his weight bench into the couch. I told him he was trash for trying to steal my fiancé, and then trying to fight me when I confronted him. I pulled out my phone, called Caroline on speaker, and asked why she was so proud that Blake was sneaking around with Mara. She laughed low and cold. She said she had warned me, that Blake was a better fit, that Mara deserved a real man who was present and exciting, and that I was never home just like Victor. I hung up. That night, the family group chat exploded with Caroline spinning the tale that I had attacked Blake. Victor tried to soothe me and asked me to consider that Caroline worried about Mara's happiness. My fiancé was in my brother's arms because my mother told her he was the stronger man, and somehow the problem was my reaction. Mara returned the next day while I was at work, packed her things, left the ring on the counter, and scribbled a note saying she never meant to hurt me and hoped I would forgive her someday. 2 years, tossed aside for a six-pack and buckets of protein powder. Caroline called to warn me not to make it ugly and said Blake and Mara were happier together and that I would find someone else eventually. I wanted to scream, but a colder anger set in. They imagined I would accept a new family arrangement with smiles at holiday dinners while they played house. I told Caroline she had no idea what she had set in motion. Later, I called my sister Ava. I told her I did not know how to fix any of it, that they were flaunting the relationship, that Blake kept messaging me, that Mara was posting vague quotes about following your heart, and that Caroline cheered them on. Ava said I could not fix them, but I also did not have to let them walk over me. That line settled into my bones. If they wanted a war, I would oblige. The last scrap of guilt burned away. I dug in. Blake's coaching business was mostly online. He sold fitness plans, custom powders, and bragged about how well he was doing. A friend of mine named Nolan hinted that Blake was cutting corners and possibly reselling cheap or expired supplements with fancy labels. He said you could smell rancid powder from outside Blake's garage. I felt a grim spark of purpose. I started gathering screenshots of Blake boasting about cash, only deals, and tax-free profits. I saved posts where he hinted at secret formulas in local fitness groups. At the same time, I looked into Caroline's real estate image. She loved to parade her 5-star ratings, but several reviews looked like fakes, with usernames full of numbers and no real activity. I filed everything away. If they wanted to wreck my life, I would answer with lawful measures. Victor pushed for a family meeting to address what he called tension. I went purely to take the temperature and look for leverage. Caroline sat with arms folded and a hard face. Blake and Mara sat shoulder to shoulder like a smug duo. Victor hovered near the doorway and tried to start a calm conversation. Caroline waved him off and announced that Victor and she believed I should respect Mara's decision, and that if she was happier with Blake, that was that. She suggested I focus on my job or find a hobby, and that I would move on. I smiled slowly and asked if she genuinely expected me to accept that my fiancé had found a stronger man in my brother and that we would pretend it was normal. Mara's eyes flashed with guilt before she covered it and said I worked constantly, and she felt alone, and that Caroline and Blake helped her realize what she needed. Blake crossed his arms and said if I had shown up more, this would not have happened. My hands curled into fists. I asked about his responsibility, told him he had flirted behind my back for months, and asked if that was my fault too. He puffed up and told me to watch my mouth. I told him I would speak plainly because he had destroyed the relationship and that Mara was not innocent either. Caroline stepped between us and claimed that if I had been a better partner, Mara would not have strayed. I laughed and said paying for a future counted, and that maybe I did not have big biceps and an online following, but I had dignity, which the three of them lacked. Victor tried to settle us down. Blake told Victor to shut up and blamed him for my supposed weakness. For the first time, I saw Victor's hurt flash across his face. I did not let him speak. I told them I was done and wished Blake and Mara a lifetime of therapy, and told Caroline to enjoy her illusions. Before Blake could swing again, I walked out while Victor called after me. The next day, I struck back. I filed an anonymous tip to the State Consumer Health Office about expired supplements being repackaged and sold by Blake, attaching screenshots of his underground deals and tax boasts. I also submitted an anonymous complaint to the Regional Real Estate Board about clusters of suspicious 5-star reviews on Caroline's profile, along with an informal IP analysis from a tech-savvy buddy that suggested the accounts came from the same device. Nolan asked if I was sure. I told him they had tried to ruin me, and that it was their turn to watch flames of their own making. The dominoes started to fall. Blake's certification was suspended, and his gym fired him as rumors spread about expired stock. He ranted online about haters. Caroline doubled down and claimed I was jealous. Relatives whispered that I might be behind it, though they had no proof. Blake lost his big clients, money dried up, and he broke his lease and moved back in with Caroline. The board found more than odd reviews in Caroline's case. They flagged rushed closings and messy inspection records. Clients pulled out, her broker put her on probation, and her perfect image slipped. She blamed betrayal and posted vague digs. Mara, who had seen Blake as some alpha, realized she had picked a sinking ship. His income was gone, his reputation wrecked, and he could not fund the getaway they had talked about. She missed my life where the bills were paid and the fridge was full. A week later, Mara texted that she was sorry and wished things had not ended like this and asked if we could talk. I answered that I was busy and wished her luck with her strong man, then blocked her. Victor invited me to a family dinner. I decided to go and show a calmer version of myself and watch them squirm. By then, I had landed a promotion to supervisor with a raise and a company truck. I brought a date, Tessa, the no-nonsense receptionist from my gym who already knew the whole mess and came for support and a bit of spectacle. When we walked into Caroline's house, the air felt heavy. Blake glared, his scowl deepening when he saw Tessa. Mara stood by the kitchen island, with a glass of wine and jittery eyes. Caroline set plates too hard and tried to act composed. She remarked stiffly that I had brought a guest. I put an arm around Tessa and introduced her. Tessa smiled politely with a spark in her eyes. Victor cleared his throat and urged us to sit and catch up. We took our places around the old wood table, and silence stretched. Caroline forced a bright tone and said I looked well, and that she had heard about my new position. I smirked and confirmed the promotion, and said it was nice not being chained to drama. Blake's jaw knotted as he swirled water in a plastic cup. He looked worn out, dressed in faded sweats, the apartment gone, the gym job gone, the brand deals gone. Mara said she was happy for me in a thin voice. Tessa said I had earned it, and added that some people only valued hard work after they had lost it. The room went cold. Caroline pivoted to ask Blake about his job search. He grunted that there was no luck because his certification was suspended for 2 years thanks to a snitch, and he stared at me. He asked if I knew anything about it. I raised an eyebrow and said I had a real job and no time to obsess over his shady side business. He slammed his fist and accused me of sabotaging him. I told him that if his work had been legal, there would be nothing to report, and he should stop blaming the messenger. Caroline hissed that I needed to apologize for meddling in my brother's life. I laughed and said we could call it meddling the same way she meddled by pushing my fiancé toward her favorite son. Mara's eyes filled. She said she had felt neglected and that Blake had been there. Tessa cut in and told Mara to stop playing the victim, that she had made a choice and needed to own it. That was when Blake snapped. He lunged across the table and knocked a glass. Tessa leaned back with a yelp. I stood and braced. Blake swung off balance. Victor rushed in. Blake's fist clipped a decorative bowl, and he stumbled into the coffee table. Blood ran from his nose. Caroline shrieked that he was bleeding because of me. I stepped back and said he had tried to punch me. Victor's face went red, and he ordered everyone out. He told Caroline to get Blake to the bathroom and asked Mara to help Tessa, and told me it was best if I left. Tessa and I grabbed our coats. Mara followed us towards the door, crying that none of this was what she wanted. I told her she had made her bed, and to sleep in it, and we left to the sound of Caroline barking orders for towels. In the days after that chaotic dinner, the last steps of my plan clicked into place. Blake's nose had a minor fracture, but that was the least of his problems. The health inspectors traced complaints to his garage and photographed tubs of expired inventory with relabeled stickers. Former clients began posting about nausea and headaches after using his supposed premium blends. The gym blacklisted him. No studio in the city would touch his name. Caroline's brand took hits every week as more suspicious reviews vanished and old transactions were flagged for sloppy inspections and rushed closings. A rival agent shared a local news piece about forged testimonials with a wink aimed at Caroline's circle. Her broker suspended her, then pushed her out. Mara tried to stand by Blake, but bills stacked higher than his ego. She discovered that big muscles and swagger did not cover rent. She started complaining to mutual friends that Blake was volatile and snapping at her. Then the calls began. Missed calls in double digits. Blake left a voicemail calling me a coward and insisting I could not do this to family. Mara texted that she was sorry and that she missed me. Caroline sent a long message accusing me of tearing the family apart and humiliating them for no reason. I let everything ring and kept my silence. Victor asked to see me alone. Curiosity 1. I found him in the living room with Caroline, Blake, and Mara whispering in the kitchen. He looked worn down. He said he had not stood up for me enough. I told him we could skip the regret because I was fine. He asked whether I wanted them ruined. I answered that I had only shown authorities the truth. If Blake had been clean, the tip would have died in a day. If Caroline's record had been spotless, no complaint would stick. He rubbed his eyes and asked whether I felt any pity. I reminded him of what they had done and called the result justice. The kitchen door opened. Caroline entered with her arms crossed, Blake with a bandage on his nose, and Mara with red eyes. Caroline announced that we would settle it now and ordered me to call off whatever I had done. I asked what she would do if I refused. She said they would go to the police. I said truth was a defense, and if Blake and Caroline had nothing to hide, no one would care. Blake glared and called me a snake. He mocked my supervisor title and spit on my construction work. I smiled and told him I did not need to be better, only smarter. Mara stepped forward and said she wanted to apologize, that Caroline had pushed her, that she had been confused. Caroline snapped that Mara had wanted a stronger man and that they had an understanding. Mara crumpled and admitted she had been lonely, and that Caroline kept saying, I would never be around. I told her that a mistake does not include stealing my time, lying for months, and carrying on with my brother while laughing with my mother. She sobbed. Blake turned on her and told her to stop pretending innocence. Caroline hissed that I was the true enemy for dismantling their happiness. I almost laughed. They were drowning in fines and disgrace. Some happiness. I told Victor I came to say I was done with all of them. No more calls, no more messages. Nothing. Blake told me to go to hell. I said I had already been there and that now it was their turn. I walked out while their voices rose behind me. By morning, a friend told me Blake had tried to borrow money from half a dozen people and was turned down by all once they heard the story. Mara began applying for jobs in a neighboring town to dodge gossip. Caroline's deals kept collapsing as clients withdrew and old files were audited. I poured my energy into work, hit targets ahead of schedule, and earned more respect from my crew. The insult that I was never present turned into a weapon I used for myself. I built a life with boundaries they could not cross. A week later, Mara sent an email longer than anything she had ever written. She wrote that I had always been steady, that listening to Caroline had been foolish, that Blake was not who she imagined, and that she wished she could undo it. I deleted it without replying. Some people called me a villain for what I did. I recognized that I had taken satisfaction in their pain. I had chosen to press every lawful button I could find. The truth is, I wanted them to suffer. They did. Months passed. Blake was officially barred from training for 2 years. Studios kept him off their rosters. Caroline's real estate presence withered. Her broker severed ties. The office she had lorded over closed for code issues. Lawsuits loomed for the messy sales she had pushed. Mara disappeared from the feeds she once filled with quotes about following your heart. Victor finally stared straight at the mess and told me he was considering leaving Caroline. He said life with her felt suffocating. I wished him luck and kept my distance. I moved out of the old place with its bad history and into a larger apartment with space for a home office. The promotion stuck. Tessa and I spent weekends hiking outside Brookview, a town far from Caroline's orbit, or grabbing late breakfasts at a diner in North Point. Tessa had no patience for men like Blake, and she had no need to be impressed by my hours. She wanted honesty and quiet. That was enough. Do I regret the scorched earth? Sometimes in the small hours, I replay the moment at Blake's window and wonder if there had been a turn I missed. Then I remember Caroline steering Mara toward my brother. Remember the smug grins. Remember being told to accept a new normal where I smiled through their fantasy. Some lines, once crossed, do not uncross. People say villains think they are heroes. I do not need the title. I took the people who chose betrayal and let their own choices collapse on them. My mother tried to hand my fiancé to my brother. My brother took it. Mara abandoned her vows before they began because someone stronger flexed nearby. I gave them exactly what they asked for. They wanted a real man. They got one, not the one they expected.